Enjoy our spine-chilling stories as you sleep, commute, or relax. If you're new, hit subscribe and share with friends and family. Let us know in the comments how we can improve. Our stories are best experienced with headphones on. Now, let's dive into today's tale.
Warning: the following stories contain elements of horror that explore themes of the supernatural, possession, psychological terror, and gruesome transformations. They are intended for mature audiences and may not be suitable for those sensitive to graphic imagery or themes of death, entrapment, and eternal damnation. Listener discretion is advised. Screams from the Attic, Unraveling a Family Secret. Story number 1. The Forgotten Daughter. Chapter 1. Return to the old house. David Miller pulled his Honda Civic into the driveway of his childhood home on Maple Street in Dormont, a quiet suburb of Pittsburgh. The two-story colonial, with its faded white clapboard and black shutters, seemed shrunken by time and neglect. It was September 15th, 2013, a crisp Sunday afternoon, the air tinged with the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. The temperature hovered around 70 degrees Fahrenheit, a gentle nudge of autumn against the lingering warmth of summer. He lingered in the car, staring at the house. 2 weeks ago, he'd been told his mother, Margaret Miller, had passed away, a sudden loss that left him reeling, though their relationship had frayed over the years. Now 35, David had built a life far from Pittsburgh, but duty called him back to sort through her belongings and decide the fate of this old house. The front door creaked open with a turn of the key, revealing a dim interior shrouded in dust and silence. He flipped on the lights, illuminating a living room where furniture hid beneath sheets like ghosts of his past. Memories flickered. Family dinners, his mother's quiet evenings with a book. Margaret had raised him alone after his father's death when David was 5, working tirelessly as a librarian. She'd always been private, deflecting questions about his father or their family history with a tight smile. He wandered through the house. The kitchen was spotless, the fridge empty, save for a jar of mustard. His mother's bedroom held her neatly hung clothes. The bed made as if she might return. An unease settled over him, a sense that something was missing. His gaze drifted upstairs to the hallway's end, where a locked door loomed. The attic. As a child, he'd been forbidden to enter, warned of its dangers. Now, with Margaret gone, curiosity tugged at him. In her jewelry box, he found a rusty key. Heart thudding with anticipation, he approached the attic door, inserted the key, and turned it. The lock clicked, and the door swung open, revealing a narrow staircase vanishing into shadow. Chapter 2. The Locked Attic. David paused at the foot of the stairs, the darkness above, thick and unyielding. He flicked the light switch, but the bulb was dead. Grabbing a flashlight from his toolbox, he ascended, each step creaking beneath his weight. At the top, he swept the beam across a cluttered attic, boxes stacked haphazardly, old furniture draped in cobwebs, trunks sealed with dust. The air was heavy, forcing a cough as he waved the light ahead. Then the beam caught something odd, a crib in the corner, draped with a pink blanket, beside a rocking chair and a toy box brimming with stuffed animals. Unlike the attic's grime, the crib was pristine, as if recently tended. David's pulse quickened. Why was this here? His mother had never spoken of another child. He was her only son, or so he'd thought. He lifted the blanket. The crib was empty, but the mattress was soft, sheets folded with care. Nearby, a small desk held a notebook in his mother's meticulous handwriting, a diary spanning 1985 to 1995. Entries mentioned Anna and her struggles. Anna had a bad day, one read. She doesn't understand why she can't go outside. I try to comfort her, but she cries. Another. The doctor says Anna's autism is severe. With care, she could live well, but I can't give her the world she deserves. David's hands shook. Anna was his half-sister, born after his father's death, hidden away due to her severe autism. The diary ended abruptly in 1995, offering no conclusion. He rummaged through the desk, finding medical records and letters, but no hint of Anna's fate. Who was she, and why had his mother kept her a secret? Chapter 3. The screams. That night, David jolted awake in his old bedroom, a faint scream piercing the silence. It came from above. The attic. At first, he thought it a dream, but the sound grew. A woman's voice, thick with anguish. Heart pounding, he grabbed his flashlight and raced upstairs, calling, "Who's there?" The screams ceased as he reached the attic, leaving a heavy stillness. He swept the light across the space. Nothing moved. Then a child's giggle echoed, followed by soft footsteps skittering across the floor. "Anna," he whispered, voice trembling. Silence answered. Suddenly, the attic's bulb flickered on, casting a weak glow. A cold hand brushed his shoulder, and he spun to face a translucent girl in a white nightgown, her wide eyes pleading. "Anna," he asked again. She nodded, pointed to the crib, and vanished as the light died, plunging him into darkness. Terror drove him downstairs, where he collapsed on his bed, mind racing. Was Anna's spirit trapped here, reaching out? The next morning he set up a camera in the attic. The footage chilled him. A ghostly Anna played with toys, then turned to scream at the lens. Her face etched with sorrow. She was real, and she needed something from him. Chapter 4. Uncovering the secret. David spent the next day scouring the attic and house for answers. He found Anna's birth certificate. Anna Marie Miller, born June 10th, 1985, father unknown, and medical records detailing her nonverbal autism and intensive care needs. Letters from his mother to specialists revealed her desperation. "I love Anna, but I'm alone. Is there hope for her?" Then, buried in a trunk, he found 1995 hospital bills and a death certificate. Anna had died of pneumonia on August 3rd, 1995, at age 10. Yet there was no funeral record, and the local cemetery held no grave for her. Why the secrecy? His thoughts shifted to his mother's death. Her funeral had been small, paid in cash, with no hospital records of her passing. The cemetery plot was separate from his father's, and inquiries revealed no official documentation. A chilling truth dawned. Margaret wasn't dead. She'd faked it to bury the shame of Anna's hidden life and death. Chapter 5. The mother's deception. David found an address in his mother's study. Margaret Smith, Miami, Florida. He dialed the number, and her voice answered, shaky with shock. "David? How did you find me?" He demanded answers, and she agreed to meet. Days later, he arrived at a modest bungalow in Miami. Margaret, older but alive, ushered him inside. Over tea, she unraveled the past. After his father's death, a brief affair left her pregnant with Anna. Fearing stigma over Anna's autism, she hid her in the attic, aided by discreet nurses. When Anna died, Margaret buried her in an unmarked grave, drowning in guilt. Years later, she staged her death to escape, starting anew in Miami. "Why didn't you tell me?" David asked, voice thick with hurt. "I was ashamed," she whispered, eyes wet. "I thought I was protecting you." He left, grappling with anger and a flicker of pity for her isolation. Chapter 6. Confrontation and Resolution. Back in Pittsburgh, David resolved to honor Anna. He organized a memorial at Dormont's church, inviting neighbors and Anna's caregivers. Standing before them, he shared her story, her hidden life, his mother's flawed love, her spirit's unrest. As he spoke, a calm settled over him, as if Anna's presence lifted. His mother didn't attend, but sent a letter of apology, promising to visit. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a thread of hope. The small service gave Anna the recognition she'd been denied, a step toward peace. Chapter 7. Healing and Closure. That night, the house was still. No screams, no apparitions. David knew Anna's spirit had moved on. The next day, he listed the house for sale, ready to let go. Driving away, he glanced back, a bittersweet ache in his chest. Months later, Margaret visited. Their talks were tentative, but they began to mend what was broken. It wasn't perfect, but facing the past, Anna's life, her death, the attic's secrets, offered a fragile healing. David had confronted the horror and emerged with closure. Anna's story finally told. Story number 2. The Curse of Hawthorne Manor. Chapter 1. The Arrival. The wind howled through the skeletal trees surrounding Hawthorne Manor, a sprawling, decrepit estate perched on the outskirts of Salem, Massachusetts. Its blackened shingles hung like loose teeth, and the windows stared out like hollow eyes, reflecting the gray October sky. Evelyn Carter pulled her coat tighter around her as she stepped out of the taxi, her boots crunching on the gravel path. She was 32, a historian with a penchant for the macabre, and this was her latest obsession, a house steeped in whispers of witchcraft and ruin. The driver didn't linger. "Good luck," he muttered, eyeing the manor warily before speeding off. Evelyn adjusted her scarf and dragged her suitcase toward the sagging porch. She'd inherited the property from a distant aunt she'd never met, a woman named Margaret Hawthorne, who died alone in the attic 6 months prior. The will had been cryptic. "To Evelyn Carter, the last of my line, I leave the manor and its secrets." Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint scent of decay. The foyer stretched upward, its chandelier dangling like a spider's web. Evelyn flicked a switch, but the bulbs stayed dark. She sighed, retrieving a flashlight from her bag. The beam danced across peeling wallpaper and portraits of stern-faced Hawthorns, their eyes seeming to follow her as she moved deeper into the house. She'd come to catalog the manor's history, to uncover its ties to Salem's witch trials, but as she climbed the creaking staircase, a chill settled into her bones. The attic loomed at the top, its doors slightly ajar, beckoning her forward. Chapter 2. Shadows in the Dust. The attic smelled of mildew and something sharper, iron perhaps, or old blood. Evelyn pushed the door open, her flashlight illuminating a chaos of trunks, broken furniture, and cobwebs. In the center stood a cracked mirror, its surface clouded with age. She stepped closer, her reflection distorted, and for a moment she thought she saw another face, pale, eyeless, hovering behind her own. She spun around, heart pounding, but the attic was empty. "Get a grip," she muttered, shaking her head. She'd read too many ghost stories preparing for this trip. Still, the unease lingered as she began sorting through the clutter. She found journals bound in cracked leather, their pages yellowed and brittle. The handwriting was jagged, frantic, Margaret's, she assumed. One entry caught her eye, dated 1692. They burned her today. Abigail Hawthorne, my ancestor, accused of witchcraft. She cursed this house as the flames took her, swearing vengeance on Salem. I hear her at night, clawing at the walls. The pentagrams glow when she's near. Evelyn frowned. The Salem witch trials were well documented. No Abigail Hawthorne appeared in the records. Yet the journal felt authentic, its ink faded but legible. She flipped ahead, finding sketches of pentagrams, 5-pointed stars inscribed with strange symbols. A later entry read, "The attic is hers now. I locked it, but she escapes. She wants blood." A low creak echoed behind her. Evelyn turned, her flashlight catching a shadow and darting across the wall. An impossible shape. Too tall, too thin. She held her breath, waiting, but the attic remained still. Then, faintly, she heard it. A whisper, like dry leaves skittering across stone. "Abigail," she ventured, her voice trembling. The mirror flared with a sickly green light, and the whispers grew louder. Chapter 3. The Witch's Mark. Evelyn stumbled back as the light pulsed, casting jagged shadows across the attic. The pentagrams from Margaret's sketches appeared on the floor, glowing faintly, their lines etched into the wood as if burned there. She grabbed the journal and bolted downstairs, slamming the attic door behind her. Her hand shook as she barricaded it with a chair, though she knew it wouldn't hold anything supernatural. In the kitchen, she brewed coffee on a camping stove. She'd brought supplies, expecting the manor's utilities to be defunct, and pored over the journal. Margaret's later entries grew increasingly unhinged. "She speaks to me now. Abigail. She says the Hawthorns owe her a debt. I see her in the mirror, her face charred, her eyes gone. She wants me to join her." Evelyn rubbed her temples. Was Margaret delusional, or had something real haunted her? As a historian, she leaned toward skepticism, but the glowing pentagrams defied explanation. She needed more evidence. The next morning, she explored the manor's library, a cavernous room lined with moldering books. Amid treatises on Puritan law, she found a slim volume titled The Unseen Legacy of Salem. Its author, a 19th century scholar named Elias Crow, claimed that several witches executed in 1692 had been erased from official records, their families complicit in the cover-up. One name stood out, Abigail Hawthorne. Abigail was no mere dabbler. She wielded power the magistrates feared, curses that lingered beyond death. Her kin buried her story, but her spirit endures, bound to the manor she once called home. Evelyn's pulse quickened. If Abigail was real, her execution could explain the haunting. But why target the Hawthorns? She traced her finger over a faded map in the book, marking the manor's location. A symbol caught her eye. A pentagram, identical to those in the attic. That night, the whispers returned, louder, angrier. Evelyn woke to find a pentagram scratched into her bedroom door, its lines deep and uneven, as if clawed by unseen hands. Chapter 4. The Spirit Emerges. By the third day, Evelyn couldn't deny it. The manor was alive with something malevolent. Objects moved, keys vanished, books fell from shelves, and the air grew heavy, oppressive. She decided to confront the source. Armed with the journal, a flashlight, and a kitchen knife, more for courage than utility, she returned to the attic. The door swung open before she touched it, revealing a room transformed. The pentagrams blazed brighter, their light pulsing in time with an unseen heartbeat. Shadows writhed along the walls, coalescing into a figure. A woman, tall and skeletal, her skin blackened as if scorched. Her face was a ruin, eyeless sockets staring blankly. Yet Evelyn felt the weight of her gaze. "Abigail," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite her fear. "I'm a hawthorn. Tell me what you want." The figure tilted its head, and the whispers sharpened into words. "Blood. Vengeance. The debt." Evelyn clutched the journal. "What debt? Your family betrayed you?" A laugh, brittle and cold, filled the attic. The mirror flared again, and images flickered across its surface. Flames, a gallows, a crowd chanting. Abigail's voice rasped. "They gave me to the fire, my own kin, to save themselves." Evelyn pieced it together. The Hawthorns, fearing Abigail's power, had accused her of witchcraft, sacrificing her to appease the magistrates. Her curse was their punishment, a legacy of guilt passed down through generations. "I'm not them," Evelyn said. "I didn't betray you." The spirit drifted closer, her charred fingers brushing Evelyn's cheek. The touch burned, and Evelyn gasped, dropping the knife. "You carry their blood," Abigail hissed. "That is enough." The pentagrams flared, and the attic shook. Evelyn ran, but the door slammed shut, trapping her with the witch's spirit. Chapter 5. Breaking the Curse. Evelyn pressed against the door, her mind racing. Abigail's rage was palpable, a force that threatened to consume her. But the journal, Margaret's words, offered a clue. She'd written of a ritual, a way to appease Abigail, though it had driven her mad before she could complete it. Evelyn scanned the pages, finding a passage circled in red ink. To end the curse, offer what was taken, truth and blood. Speak her story, spill your own. She must be seen. The attic trembled as Abigail loomed closer, her shadows tightening like a noose. Evelyn grabbed the knife and sliced her palm, wincing as blood dripped onto the floor. "Listen to me," she shouted. "Abigail Hawthorne, I see you. You were a healer, a seer, betrayed by your family. They feared your power and gave you to the flames. But I'll tell your story. Salem will know the truth." The spirit paused, her eyeless face tilting. Evelyn pressed on, reciting every detail she'd uncovered. Abigail's life, her trial, her curse. The blood pooled beneath her, mingling with the pentagram's glow. "I'm sorry," she finished. "Rest now." For a moment, silence reigned. Then Abigail's form softened, the charred edges fading. A sigh, like wind through dead branches, echoed as the spirit dissolved. The pentagrams dimming to nothing. The mirror cracked, its light extinguished. Evelyn slumped against the door, exhausted. When she opened it, the manor felt lighter, the oppressive weight gone. Downstairs, she bandaged her hand and began writing. Abigail's story, as promised. Epilogue. Weeks later, Evelyn published her findings, a book titled The Witch of Hawthorne Manor. It sold modestly, but in Salem, it sparked debates, reviving Abigail's name. The manor remained hers, though she rarely returned. The attic stayed silent, its shadows still. Sometimes, in her dreams, Evelyn saw a woman with no eyes, smiling faintly. Not vengeance, but gratitude. Story number 3, The Phantom of Oakwood Plantation. Chapter 1, The Purchase. Michael Johnson stood on the gravel driveway of Oakwood Plantation, sweat beading on his forehead, as the humid savanna air pressed against him. It was July 13th, 2013, and the sun hung low, painting the antebellum mansion's white columns in hues of gold and shadow. At 30, Michael had traded his stable job at an Atlanta architecture firm for a gamble, restoring forgotten southern estates. Oakwood, with its peeling paint and overgrown gardens, was his first conquest. He'd snagged it at auction for a steal, drawn by its history and potential. Now, As he gazed at the sagging porch and dark, empty windows, a flicker of doubt crept in. The place felt abandoned, not just by people, but by time itself. Still, he saw the vision. Guests lounging on a restored veranda, the ballroom gleaming once more. With a determined nod, he unlocked the heavy oak door and stepped inside. The foyer smelled of damp wood and neglect. Dust motes danced in the faint light, filtering through cracked shutters. Michael flicked the chandelier switch, but it stayed dark. Rewiring would be a priority. His boots echoed as he explored the parlor, noting the warped floorboards and faded wallpaper. Upstairs, the bedrooms were a time capsule. 4-poster beds draped in tattered lace, wardrobes reeking of mothballs. At the end of the hall, a narrow staircase led to a locked door, the attic. The realtor had brushed it off as storage, probably cluttered with junk. Michael added it to his mental to-do list and turned away, eager to begin. Chapter 2. The First Night. Exhausted from the drive, Michael opted for a sleeping bag in the parlor rather than risk the musty beds. The mansion was silent, save for the occasional groan of old wood. He drifted into uneasy sleep, dreaming of shadowy figures drifting through the halls. A scream pierced the quiet. Michael bolted upright, heart pounding. It was faint, distant, like a cry smothered by walls. He held his breath, listening. Another scream, this time sharper, a child's voice, laced with terror. It came from above, the attic. Grabbing his flashlight, he climbed the stairs, the beam trembling in his grip. At the attic door, he pressed his ear to the wood. Nothing. He rattled the knob, locked tight. Had it been the wind? His tired mind playing tricks. Unease coiled in his gut as he returned to the parlor, the echo of that cry lingering in the dark. Chapter 3. Uncovering the Past. Morning brought resolve. Michael drove to the Savannah Historical Society, a brick building nestled near Forsyth Park. The librarian, Mrs. Grady, peered over her glasses as he explained his new home. Oakwood Plantation, she said, voice low. Built in 1820 by Elijah Blackwood, a cotton tycoon, a hard man, especially to those he owned. Anything about the attic? Michael asked. She hesitated. Not directly, but there were whispers of a hidden child, a son born to one of his slaves. Elijah kept him out of sight, ashamed of the scandal. Back at Oakwood, Michael attacked the attic door with a crowbar. It gave with a splintering groan, revealing a cramped space thick with dust. Broken chairs and crates littered the floor, but in the corner stood a small bed, its springs rusted. Beneath the mattress, he found a child's drawing, a stick-figure boy and a woman labeled "Me and Mama" in shaky script. His stomach twisted. The rumors might be true. Chapter 4. The haunting begins. The screams returned that night, louder and more insistent. Michael lay awake, staring at the ceiling as they drilled into his skull. By the third night, exhaustion frayed his nerves. While sanding the ballroom floor, he caught a glimpse of movement, a small shadow darting across the wall. He spun, tools clattering. "Who's there?" he shouted. Silence mocked him. The nightmares came next. In them, a boy with warm brown skin and wide, terrified eyes crouched in the attic. A tall man in a frock coat towered over him, whip raised, his voice a growl. "You'll stay hidden." Michael woke gasping. The boy's face burned into his memory. He couldn't dismiss it as imagination anymore. Something lingered here, tethered to the house, and it was reaching out. Chapter 5. Seeking help. Desperate. Michael scoured online forums for answers, landing on Dr. Amelia Hart, a paranormal investigator with a PhD in Southern folklore. Her site claimed she'd resolved hauntings across the region. He fired off an email detailing the screams, the shadow, the drawing. Her reply came swiftly. "I'll arrive tomorrow. This sounds like a residual haunting tied to trauma. We'll uncover the truth." Amelia pulled into the driveway the next day, a wiry woman with keen eyes and a duffel bag of gear. She paced the mansion, pausing at the attic door. "The energy's thick here," she said, tracing the frame. "Something, or someone, is trapped." Michael handed her the drawing. Her expression softened. "This boy's the heart of it. We need his story." Chapter 6. The investigation. That night, Amelia transformed the attic into a lab. EMF meters blinking, a spirit box humming with static. Michael hovered nearby, skeptical but clinging to hope. As midnight struck, she spoke into the void. "Who are you? What do you want?" The spirit box crackled. A small voice emerged. "James. My name is James." Michael's breath caught. "James, who kept you here?" Amelia asked. A pause. Then a guttural snarl erupted. "He is mine. Get out." The air turned icy, the EMF meter shrieking. Shadows thickened, forming a towering figure with hollow eyes. Elijah Blackwood, Michael realized with a shudder. The attic door slammed shut, locking them in. Amelia faced the specter. "Elijah, your secret's done. You can't hold him anymore." Chapter 7. Confronting the Spirits. Amelia lit a bundle of sage, its smoke curling through the chill. "James, show us your truth." The attic shimmered, and the scene shifted. Michael blinked as the dusty space became a prison. A barred window, a small bed, and James, wrists raw from ropes, cowering as Elijah loomed. "You're a disgrace," Elijah hissed, whip cracking. The boy's screams echoed, the same ones that had haunted Michael's nights. Then the vision dissolved. Amelia's voice trembled. "Elijah hid James here, ashamed of his heritage. The boy died alone, his spirit bound by that shame. Elijah's ghost protects the lie." Michael clenched his fists. "How do we fix this?" "We honor James," she said. "Tell his story. That'll weaken Elijah enough to banish him." Chapter 8. A New Beginning. The next morning, Michael invited the Historical Society to Oakwood. He shared James's tale, showing the drawing and diary scraps he'd found. They agreed to amend the records, naming James as Elijah's son. That night, Amelia performed a cleansing. Salt scattered, lavender burned. The air lightened, and Michael felt a faint touch, like a child's hand. Then peace. Over months he restored Oakwood into a boutique hotel. The attic became a memorial room, its walls telling James's story. Guests admired the elegance, oblivious to its past. On still nights, Michael heard a soft laugh, a child at play. He smiled, knowing James was free at last.
If you're new, hit subscribe and share with